Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me start out, Madam Secretary, with the full faith and credit issue that my colleague Senator Wyden has raised. We are in agreement that we need to protect the full faith and credit of the United States. Frankly, as I indicated in my opening statement, the problem that we see on the Republican side is that it's all tax and all spending increases in terms of the administration's approach to this. And while you and the chairman just discussed a number of concerns you have with Republican ideas with regard to how to deal with this, the bottom line is that we must stop trying to solve this problem by massive new spending and massive new taxes. So we have some disagreements about how to deal with this. What I would ask of you is, at this point, the president has refused to negotiate with Republicans on fiscal restraint policies that they believe need to be put into place with a new extension of the debt ceiling. We must engage in negotiations to get over some of these disagreements, and this new debt ceiling resolution must include fiscal restraint. We've got to get some kind of attention to this. I think the American public is crying out for Congress to pay attention to this issue and put fiscal restraint in place. Can you commit at least to negotiate with Republicans as we try to work forward on finding some aspects of fiscal restraint to put into the debt ceiling discussion?
Senator Crapo, the president has indicated that he considers it critically important to have a sustainable and responsible fiscal path. And he's put on the table in the budget a number of ideas, many ideas about how to grow the economy while also cutting deficits. And this is a matter that he is very prepared to discuss and negotiate with Republicans, but it can't be a condition for raising the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling simply must be raised, and to put at risk the full faith and credit of the United States and to threaten to cause an economic and financial catastrophe isn't an acceptable
Madam Secretary,
requirement.
I interpret your answer to be that you're very willing to discuss the president's budget, tax increases, and increased spending, but you're not willing to discuss, with regard to the debt ceiling discussion, any actual fiscal restraint in terms of spending control in the United States. Now, if I interpreted it wrong, I'm sorry, but we've got to get negotiating on more than just whether the president's budget is the right approach. There are other ideas, and we need to be engaged in it. I just hope that you'll take that message back to the president.
The president has indicated that he would welcome discussions about the stance of fiscal policy.
All right, I appreciate that. Let's move quickly to the SVB crisis in the banking industry. Can we agree, at least as a starter, as we try to understand how this is all playing out, that the issue here in terms of risk is liquidity risk that we are facing in the system, and that SVB had a liquidity risk issue?
Well, there was a run on the bank. It had high reliance on uninsured deposits, and there was a massive withdrawal of deposits that led to liquidity problems. The bank had to be closed for that reason.
So do you agree then that it is a liquidity risk that we're dealing with in this issue?
Well, there was a liquidity risk in this situation. There will be a careful look at what happened in the bank and what initiated this problem, but clearly the downfall of the bank, the reason it had to be closed, was that it couldn't meet depositors' withdrawal requests.
Because their capital was losing value, and they were not able to access their capital, and I attribute that to the interest rate hikes that we are seeing in the face of the inflation. Am I wrong in that?
Well, my understanding is that the bank, to meet liquidity needs, had to sell assets that it expected to hold to maturity. And given the interest rate increases that have occurred since those assets, including treasuries and government-backed mortgage-backed securities, they had lost market value.
All right, yeah, and we're on the same page on that then. I appreciate that. One other question with regard to the bank failure, and this is with regard to the efforts to get a private buyer to help solve this issue. Regarding these issues, the solution would have been to get a private sector solution that protected taxpayers, calmed the markets, and prevented the potential assessments from being inappropriately levied against community banks. Press reports have indicated that some of the FDIC board members may have slow-walked the negotiations with regard to potential political backlash surrounding mergers and acquisitions. And it was because of that that we were not able to move forward promptly with obtaining a buyer. Are those reports accurate?
Well, this is something that is a question for the FDIC, really, rather than me, but I know that the FDIC looked for buyers, and a merger or acquisition is certainly something that they were open to as a way to resolve the institution.
All right, thank you. Very quickly, on the OECD agreement, I'm very much opposed to it, yet it seems to me that Treasury is pushing for Congress to approve its approach to the OECD negotiations and is already giving support to nations around the world in the OECD to tax U.S. profits that would be directly in contrast or in conflict with U.S. tax treaties. Am I correct in that?
137 countries signed this agreement and see it as a way to put a floor on taxation of corporations and multinational corporations and stop a race to the bottom. And the European Union has adopted Pillar 2, the global minimum tax, and other jurisdictions are moving forward.
My question,
we feel it's in the U.S. interest to adopt this. We have proposed.
I understand, Madam Secretary. My time has expired, and the chairman's trying to get me to wrap up. I do want to make one more quick statement. I would like to express my concern about numerous proposals in the Green Book in the budget that we won't have time to get into here today. Last year, Treasury did not provide answers to these questions for the record responses for 6 months. And I just would like to ask you to pay attention to this year and have your team respond to us promptly as we get questions for the record on this year's budget.
Senator Grassley.
Yeah. You didn't answer his last question about OECD and tax treaties. Is what you're proposing in any way a violation of the tax treaties that we've had with other countries?
No, there's no violation in anything we've proposed with tax treaties that we've engaged in. This is something that the OECD considered very carefully, and there's no violation of our tax treaty.
Well, we surely don't agree with your analysis of that. Only Congress has the power to approve tax treaties. I want to go to your position as a member of the Social Security Board of Trustees. You and other people put out an annual report, quote, lawmakers should address the projected trust fund shortfalls in a timely way in order to phase in necessary changes gradually and give workers and beneficiaries time to adjust to them, end of quote. I don't disagree at all with that statement. President Biden has claimed that his budget reduces the deficits while protecting Social Security. However, the president's budget includes no proposal to extend the solvency of the Social Security Trust Fund. Anyone who knows that things get done around here know it takes presidential leadership to lead major reforms to Social Security. 40 years ago, that was a President Reagan and a Democrat Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, that put together a bipartisan agreement that was overwhelmingly approved by the Congress of the United States, and it has made Social Security sound at least through 2035. So I assume that you stand by your recommendations that lawmakers act sooner rather than later to shore up Social Security trust funds. So can Congress expect to see the president's proposal to put Social Security on a sound fiscal basis along the same ways, replicating the leadership of President Reagan and Tip O'Neill?
President Biden stands ready to work with Congress to shore up Social Security and discuss possible approaches. So that's a conversation that it's important for us to have. He has made explicit proposals in connection with Medicare and shoring it up. And it's important to have that conversation about Social Security. The president believes strongly that that should not involve cutting benefits or going back on our commitments to America's seniors. But certainly it's a discussion we need to have.
I assume that both you and the president are sincere in what you just said. It would help a lot if the president would quit demagoguing the Social Security issue the way he has in recent weeks. I want to go to an extension of conversation you and I had June of 2021. You defended concerns about the president's spending proposals fueling inflation and interest rates hikes by saying this, quote, "If we ended up with a slightly higher interest rate environment, it would actually be a plus for society's point of view and the Fed's point of view," end of quote. I want to emphasize plus for a society's point of view. Now, when you made that statement, inflation was 5.4% and the federal funds rate was effectively zero. Since that time, inflation hit a 40-year high, and the Fed has responded by aggressively hiking interest rates. As a result, families and small businesses are paying the price by way of higher interest rate costs for home loans and business lines of credit. Moreover, bank failures this past week highlighted how fragile our economy is given rising interest rates and decades-long inflation. So do you still see our inflation-driven interest rates hike as, using your words, a plus for society?
I consider high inflation the number one economic problem that all of us need to face and address. It's the president's top priority. I was very supportive of the American Rescue Plan. I think there are many factors that have contributed to high inflation. It's critical for the Fed to address it, and the president is doing all that he can, both through the Inflation Reduction Act, lowering costs of prescription drugs, lowering the cost of health care, using the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to try to lower and address higher gas and energy costs for Americans. It's critical for us to do what we can to bring inflation down and for the Fed to do its part as well. The Inflation Reduction Act was enacted at a time when I believe the greatest threat to our economy was that unemployment would remain shockingly high and that American families would be scarred by long-term job loss and losing the roofs over their heads. And I believe it was appropriate to take those actions.
My time has run out. Just let me finally say this, that what you say about the Inflation Reduction Act, reducing inflation within the last 3 weeks, the CBO says that increased inflation.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Cardin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.